All right, what is up, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Kopelman, and here with me again is Wes Gray. So, if you guys are longtime followers, then you've seen Wes come on before. He was here talking about ESOPs, but today we're actually talking about something very different. So, before we get into it, Wes, thanks for joining me, man. I couldn't think of somebody better to talk about this topic. And so, for everybody, the topic here is really about moving to Puerto Rico. I think if you're in the US, a lot of people say like, oh, you live in California, you live in New York. If you want to talk about tax planning, move. And their thought is move to Florida, move to Texas, et cetera. There's 0% state tax. And sure, that does save you some money. But if you're a high earner, you're still paying 30 to 40% plus of your taxes to the federal government. And Puerto Rico is different. So Wes, let's just talk a little bit about when did you move to Puerto Rico? How did you actually get the status? What is the status? Let's just get through all of it.
Yeah, so I've been down here almost coming on 5 years now. And we moved during COVID times because, one of the things you have to establish bona fide residency down here. And I have a wife and 3 kids. So obviously that was never going to happen unless there was a structural break in society. So that's why I was able to move down here. But essentially the acts, they call them the acts generally. It used to be called Act 2022. And then in 2019, they renamed it and they redid it all. It's all under Act 60.
Yep.
So there's basically 2 core components that are relevant for people that want to do this. There's what they call the Individual Investor Act. And what that act does is basically gives you 0% capital gains, right? And which, we can talk about more, but that's the Investor Act. The second act is the Export Services Act. So, and that, long story short, gives you 4% income tax on any services or service income that you can source to Puerto Rico. So, and that's it. So to your point, it's not like moving to Texas or moving to Florida to get rid of like the 4 or 5% state tax. This is an opportunity to literally get to 0% capital gains. And then the income that you can earn and source down here is only subject to 4% total tax. And you get to maintain your U.S. citizenship. So that's kind of like the top line numbers of why it's very compelling.
Yep. But let's get into some of the parts. The first one you said is the bona fide residency. What does that really mean? How do you get that? Is that just being there over 6 months a year?
Sure.
How does that work?
So yeah, so basically what it is to get the Individual Investor Act. It's really, you have to at a minimum live down here for 183 days, and you need to establish what they call like a bona fide residency or a bona fide tax home. So what does that mean, like from pragmatic perspectives? This has to be where you actually live. Even if you live down here, for example, say 183 days, but you go to church, you have all your kids, your wife, everyone else lives back in the States, that's not going to count. So you need to actually make Puerto Rico your no kidding tax home, where this is really where you live and where you join clubs and do everything. And there's a lot of ways. Yeah, exactly. You can visit, and there's some people that bottom tick this place at 183 days and they're bona fide, but there's other people that do that and they aren't, because they don't even really live here.
It's like your kids go to school in the U.S. Like, how are you going to really
exactly.
claim that?
Your wife lives back in the States. That's not going to cut it. So you need to make sure that this is no kidding where you're going to live as like your primary residence. And then why is that so important? Well, the reason that's so important is Puerto Rico relies on the IRS sourcing rules, and capital gains, generally speaking, are sourced to where you have your bona fide residence. And so as long as you live down here as your bona fide residence, even though you're not down here 100% of the time, 100% of your capital gain exposure will be subject to Puerto Rico sourcing. And because the way the act is set up, Puerto Rico can tax your Puerto Rican source capital gains whatever they want, and they choose to do it at 0 to incentivize you to move down here, right? So that's the Individual Act. You got to live here. You got to be bona fide living here, but technically all you need to do is be down here in 183 days. And and then just to put a bookend on that, for people that do that approach, it's usually people that choose to live down here when it's absolutely perfect. So this is going to be your kind of December through May. And then in the summertime and during hurricane season, they go live in Colorado or somewhere where the humidity is a lot less, and there's no hurricanes. So that's how people that are just focused on that part of the act generally play it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think, one thing just for people to know about living in Puerto Rico is it is expensive, right? Like there's a lot of wealthy people that live there. To live in the nicer cities that you'd actually want to live, you're probably going to assume a higher cost of living, but it just depends on where you're from. If you're from a New York or an LA or a San Francisco or San Diego, maybe not a higher cost of living. But, I had somebody who lived in, Florida, not even Miami, and they were debating, hey, should I move to there? And it was like, okay, your rent's $3,000. A similar place is going to be like $8-9 to rent in Puerto Rico. So like that has to be part of the calculation. Some people, when they think about these changes, are like, let's look at tax savings, but it's actually, let's look at net impact, right? So that's increased cost of living. That might be significantly more travel, back to the US to see friends and family. Maybe childcare is higher, more. Like you have to look at this net impact. And the one thing I always preface this conversation with the people is like, when you're wealthy, you have the choice to make decisions without taxes, but it doesn't hurt to look at the tax impact of doing things if it fits. One of my clients thought about this, hasn't made the decision, but it's also his family is from outside the US, Central America. And so it's actually closer for them to visit. They go there all the time. So he's like, tax savings plus better for my family, versus other people are like, I live in New York. I got young kids. My family's in New York. Moving to Puerto Rico just to save on taxes might actually not be the best in that situation. So let's think about taxes. Let's think about your life. But, it's really compelling here. And so you started talking about a 0% capital gains tax, right? But is that specifically for on investments or things accrued while you live there, right? It's not like, hey, I own $10 million of crypto with a dollar basis. I'm going to move to Puerto Rico, sell, then next year move back, right? Because you already have those gains in the US. So you couldn't just go avoid all of that by moving.
Yes, and to put a pin on something you also said that was very important is if you just move to Puerto Rico only for tax reasons only and you hate it here, or say your significant other hates it here, it's the worst decision. Because if you get divorced, you have a 50% drawdown and a bunch of ink. So it's just crazy. So you got to make sure you actually like the place. It's a great adventure, great community, etc. And if it's just not working for you, don't do it. And then to your next point there, yes. So what happens down here is for public assets that have a mark. When you come down here, they can get market prices on those, obviously, because it's stocks or crypto. Any appreciation after that day is subject to zero. But if you sell those securities or assets before and you haven't lived here for at least 10 years, then you just pay the normal U.S. tax. So you can't, like, if I have $1 billion of crypto, if I move down here, the next day sell it all, avoid $1 billion of cap gains. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, or every billionaire would live down here. And there's like this carryover element. The other thing is with private businesses, generally speaking, it's a time-weighted approach. So if, let's say you come down here, you own a private business for 5 years prior, then you live here for 5 years and you sell it. Well, 5 out of those 10 total years would be subject to U.S. tax. 5 of those years would be Puerto Rico, which is zero.
But it's still compelling, right? That's why there's a lot of people who own hedge funds and other things that live down there, is because if you can be there for a while, that is quite a bit of tax savings to think about. I mean, so it's 0% capital gains tax, and then like your corporate tax rate or income tax rate's 4%.
So that's now let's move to the Corporate Act. And the other thing about the Individual Investor Act is they keep raising. It's not something you would do unless you have at least some decent amount of wealth, because there's also a $10K a year donation requirement. There's like a $5K filing fee every year. And then you probably want to have a Puerto Rican accounting person do your books and records. So you're looking at, just for easy math, call it a 25-30K carry cost all in. So you want to be someone that has you don't have to be a gazillionaire, but you wouldn't want to come down here with broke and 50 grand and a hope. There's a lot of other ways to avoid capital gains. If that's what your situation is, this is for people that are, of some means. They don't have to be super rich. Now, the Corporate Export Services Act is a total different component. And this is something where you actually do pay Puerto Rico 4% tax. And the way it's structured is you basically set up a C corporation down here, Like, so I have my own, C. And then what happens is the C corporation will provide services to the state. So I sell back my own services to myself, my U.S. entity in the States. And, and I charge myself, let's just say for easy math, it's $1 million or whatever, right? So that $1 million is earned by the Puerto Rico LLC, and the corporate tax rate under the act is 4%. And so you pay the 4% tax at the C Corp level. However, dividends distributed from C corporations to bona fide Puerto Rican residents, obviously here living here, they're zero, right? So the 4% comes from the fact that the LLC that is selling the service that earns the income of $1 million, it pays 4%. But then when I take the dividend out of my corporation,
the double tax.
It avoids the double tax, so it's only 4%. Which is awesome. And that's heavily promoted down here because you're actually paying something to the Puerto Rican government, and it drives a lot of their income. So there's a lot less fees. There's not like donation requirements. Like, they highly encourage people to set up businesses down here because it's just, they love it.
Well, that makes sense, right? Because when you hear this, like, it has to basically be work done in Puerto Rico. You think, okay, I own an investment firm that's in the U.S. working with U.S. people.
Exactly.
How do then I end up getting to this point that I do it? And so you're basically just billing your services from your entity that's in here to your other entity. And then if that entity, let's say, is a C Corp, they're still going to have the tax rate. And if they dividend that to you, well, they'd probably dividend to your ownership in your own C Corp here. But you're still going to have U.S. tax most likely in certain parts if you're not perfectly matching the profit to you and through payments. But like, if you're an owner of a C Corp, they're not going to only just match it perfectly for you.
Yeah, this is where it can get really complicated, but some people actually move everything down here and they don't even file a U.S. tax return. That's possible. Because I started our business, we've been around for at least 10 years, I don't even remember, but, obviously there was no way I'm moving all my partners, everything to Puerto Rico. So I have a situation like you just mentioned where a lot of my income and services I can get down here, but I still have a lot of like U.S. sourced income in like legacy business, and then you're just subject to normal, the normal tax on that as well. So
the math is huge, right? If you have $1 million from a C Corp in the US, right, you're gonna have your salary, so you're gonna pay all those taxes.
Yep.
You're gonna dividend out the rest. You're gonna pay corporate tax rate plus long-term capital gains. So you're probably somewhere in the in 40K is basically what you're paying over here. And over here, you'd probably be paying 300 to 400K. So
yes,
it is a noticeable difference. So if you
beyond noticeable, and I'm proof of math. Like had I not done this and I lived in Philadelphia, I would be 1/5 to 1/6 as wealthy I am right now, just on taxes alone. Because
you compound that, right?
Yeah, so you then
compound
compound it
400K
at
of
zero.
tax savings.
Yeah, so you get it, and then you take the money, and then you invest it at zero, and it's crazy. It's just math. But the income thing is huge because I was at a stage where I was basically at the 50%, every new dollar is 50%. Just, you got to, lights on fire. And that's just not going to help you achieve what you need to achieve typically. And this will definitely get rid of that problem. Now, another caveat though, in my situation is also a lot more complicated than most, but generally speaking, if you want to do this right with like hiring CPAs and just outsource everything, and you also have to hire yourself as an employee, you're looking at carry costs realistically to get the 4%. I would call it 30 to 40K plus 4% tax.
40K is what we mapped it out when we went through this for a client. Expect a 40K cost every year.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually tell people, listen, if you're looking at 250K in income, that's kind of where you're getting close to like break even, or it starts to make sense. Once you're starting to go beyond that, like you're in the 500K, million, 2, 3, 4, now it's like it's almost be crazy to not do this deal. Frankly, but it's something where you want to be at least 250K. Yeah, if it fits your life and it makes sense. Well, hell, if you're making 3 or 4 mil, there might even be a circumstance where you're like, you know what? Think of this as like a deployment in the military. You're going to spend 3 or 4 years and just grind it out, but you're going to get to your number Whereas if you stay in the States, that might take you 3 times as long. So there are people that I do know where, they just consider it like a deployment. It's just 3 or 4 years. And, though I hate it, I don't really care. I'm going to make $10 million by living here for 3 years. Let's do that. But it's ideal if you're in my situation, where obviously I'm not leaving anytime soon, and I'm coming on 5 years now, so that's just convenient. But not everyone's like that, obviously.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to know, right? So if you have the business, to get that 4% tax, you also have to do certain things, right? Like at a certain revenue or profit level, you have to hire somebody in Puerto Rico to help. I think there's donation requirements, et cetera, too. Correct?
So on the Investor Act side, where you get the 0% capital gains, that's where it's much more onerous, because that's just like, generally speaking, rich people. They call them gringos down here, not in like a nefarious, just anyone who's not from Puerto Rico, the gringos. Like, they're not really doing much. Whereas the export services folks, you're actually paying the government a lot of money. So they make that as easy as possible. And having been in it, that I wouldn't sweat that. Like if you're actually going to run bona fide business and try to build something that down here, the Puerto Rican government will be very open and helpful to make sure that is convenient for you. The Investor Act is a little bit more precarious, because it's like, oh great, the rich gringo sits in Dorado on the beach and pays 0 taxes, but what are they doing for me? It's all these kind of like sense. It's kind of like indirect benefit, because, well, they buy stuff on the economy, which is true. But as you can imagine, like if you talk to like the broke Puerto Rican, it feels weird. Whereas at least if you're running a business down here, like you're actually contributing, because you have to pay some tax. And generally speaking, gringo businesses, even at 4%, are paying a lot more to the Puerto Rican coffers than Joe's Chicken Shack. Grinding 50K revenue down here. That's just not really, the scale doesn't matter.
Yep. Yeah. And I found the rule. So if you're over 3 million in annual income, you have to have 1 full-time Puerto Rico resident employee, which I'm sure is probably lower cost.
That could be yourself, though. So because the C Corp has to hire someone to do the physical work, so you can you have to hire yourself. And
that counts because you're full-time, because you're living there and you're a bona fide resident.
As a W-2 to do the actual service, and then you could hire your wife. I mean, again, they're going to make that thing easy for people as much as possible. And you could even go, if you had a really precarious situation, you could even go and talk to the governor here about that, because that's like a big deal. The Individual Investor Act, I think this year they're actually raising it to 4% tax capital gains. Like that's the area where they're trying to like make it more and more onerous, because they want to make sure that you're kind of contributing back to the system here. So that one's a little more hairy. It's still awesome, but over time, I think they're going to keep moving the bar higher.
On the capital gains side, because they'd rather bring in people that have a lot of. But I mean, they're probably see double sided, right? So capital gains will keep raising, but still lower capital gains means more wealthy people, more spending, right? Yeah, exactly. But then the business, the tax is going to be even more impactful. So they're more likely to keep a 4% there than they are to keep 0% capital gains, especially because if you get people to come there after 0% capital gains, you keep changing. I mean, if you live in California, your capital gains bracket as a wealthy person is 37%. So if they keep scaling at 10, 15, people aren't going to leave for that if it's still, half or more tax.
And I've seen it when I've been here, like the communities just like keep getting better and better and better. And some of them are very expensive. For example, like Dorado, it's like you could throw a rock and hit a billionaire every 5 minutes. Like, I mean, that place is crazy, and it's like Beverly Hills at this point. Because I know many people there that are multiple 100 millionaire types that are they're maybe shielding 20-30 mil a year just on the act. I mean, that pays for a lot of groceries for folks, and so that's why. The housing stock, everything's gotten nuts there. Where I live down here in Palmas del Mar, it's also, really nice, but it's not even on the same zip code as Dorado. And I'd still say it's affordable down here. Like if you're coming out of any metro area from the States, it's much more reachable. Where Dorado, it's like, unless you have $8-10 million, good luck buying a house in Dorado, which is crazy. It's like New York City.
What are property taxes like there?
They're nothing, man. Like everything is the cost, the overall cost of living down here outside of like Dorado or somewhere crazy. It's I would say it's probably like 60, maybe 65th percentile in the States. Like if you're
Does it require you to purchase? I've heard things that they require you within 2 years to buy a house.
For within the first 2 years on the Individual Investor Act, you have to buy a house. Now you could go buy a hut. I mean, technically, you got to go live in it. If you don't have to live in like a fancy neighborhood down here, I mean, you can buy houses in Puerto Rico for like 50 grand that are perfectly adequate. They're just not going to be inside like some crazy resort like I live in, right? The demand is so high in these certain areas where like a house in my community that's say $1 million, it'll literally be like 150K just outside the gate. In Dorado, it's like even like a magnitude higher than that because there's just so much demand to be in the gated communities here. And if I wasn't married and didn't have kids, I would totally live outside the gate because why would I not? Like I can just, walk across the gate to go to the country club and save, gazillion dollars. But you know how it is with like, constituents, like my wife would be like, okay, fine, we're moving back to the States then. Sometimes you just, part of the deal when you move down here is when you're negotiating with your significant other is, all right, we're going to be making an extra $1 million a year. So therefore I'm never going to complain about, doing your hair, doing your nails. We'll get it's just not worth arguing about. Like, fine, I'm going to do 100 or 200K is just extra consumer spending on whatever you want to be happy. And we're still 800K better off, right? So not to stereotype it, but it's usually the guy, with his Excel spreadsheet pitching the wife, and that's generally how that negotiation works down here.
Yeah, who knew we would have also learned the tax planning, but also the conversation side? Because I can actually see that, playing true. Hey, great. We're going to come here. We're going to save this amount of money. Let's spend 25% of that on whatever we want. We don't have to think about we can fly everywhere first class. You can even probably fly all the time to the U.S. private and still come out significantly ahead.
And that's what we do. I've always been like a cheap bastard because, we started our business in my house and I just was like a survivalist for so long. I just, I was like, I can't even spend an extra penny on anything because we might go bankrupt. And when we moved down here, we at least, I don't even know, 50%ed our budget, and I didn't even blink an eye because that was just part of the deal. And you can float it because fine, let's do that. So yeah, that's just part of the lifestyle shift down here for sure.
Love it. Okay, anything else that we need to add before we wrap up this episode?
No, I would say it's something that people should actually seriously explore if they're concerned about tax burdens and they have an ability to kind of move or shift their life somewhere. It's way under owned or way under misunderstood just how compelling the tax benefits are. And if you're going to move to Florida, you're going to move to Texas, you're going to uproot your life anyways. Why not just look at Puerto Rico because it's an extra hour flight from wherever the heck you were going to move anyways. Is would be my suggestion. Yep.
So to recap, right, if this is what you want to do, you have to become a bona fide resident, which really means you're there at least 183 days a year. It's your main place of business or work, but it's also you have to show it is like really your community. It's not like you spend a 183 there, but somehow you're back, kids go to school, your church is there, your country club is there. Like you need to prove it's your community. If that's the case, right, then you get that 0% capital gains on investments that are there. If you've had it for beforehand, it's going to be, basically divided by number of years. You could have the business entity is going to pay 4% tax. There's some stuff on like an annual donation of 10,000. You have to buy a business or buy real estate within 2 years, but totally agree. Like if you are a very high earner, potentially you're a very high earner for a short or midterm period of time, it's at least evaluating and seeing if this would be an option. My advice to everybody is one, do the numbers, figure out like if I live there, what would this look like? But two, go spend some time there. Like don't be like Puerto Rico. Yes. Like go spend a month, Airbnb, or spend a little bit of time trying to find the different communities, figure out where you'd want to live. But at the end of the day, if you're talking tax planning and your biggest goal is tax minimization, you have to at least think about Puerto Rico if it fits your life.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll offer it up to anyone in your audience. Like if they're coming down here to do serious due diligence, my wife and I are happy to host and give you the barrage, ask us a million questions. We'll help you out because we also are incentivized to make sure people know what they're doing when they come down here, just to make sure we have good community members and you don't just shake the boat for no reason. So always, that's an open offer to anyone in your network out there that's interested.
Love it. Love it. All right, Wes, man, appreciate you coming on and sharing this. It's an episode I've wanted to do for a while, but it's kind of hard to find like the educated person in this area to talk about it with, and no better person to talk about than the person actually living it and doing it. So appreciate the time, man, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you want to go to Puerto Rico and check it out, hit up Wes. I'm sure he'd be a really fun time to hang out with there for a bit, and tune back in next week. See you guys.